Hello and welcome to the Unusual Stories podcast. My name is Wojciech Salski, I'll be your host for today. And before we begin, may I just remind you, first of all, thank you so much for all of those of you that are supporting the podcast in any way. If you'd like to support the podcast, the best way to go about it would be to either share it with a friend, maybe click the follow button or subscribe on the channel, and really put your voice behind the podcast out there. I think that's realistically the best and also the least sort of effortful for you way of supporting my work. In other options, there's obviously an opportunity for you to follow the link below, and feel free to send me an email. I'm really keen to hear what are you taking away from this show of mine. Also, I love any sort of suggestions, maybe for the next books to read and so forth. And of course, if you'd like to support the podcast any other way, then follow the link below and check it out. Maybe you would like to get one of the books or just support financially. That's amazing. And so thank you so much anyhow, and thank you for listening, thank you for tuning in, and I guess we can get straight to it. So we're halfway through our 13th season, which is crazy, and so for today, as I promised, I've prepared a book that I actually did already read twice before. And before I even start, funnily enough, a friend of mine from work asked me earlier today, why would I read a book twice? And why would I read this book twice? And there are two reasons, really. The first one was that I initially listened to the book, and then I've discovered that I have a copy at home. I believe my father had this copy, so I actually, in my book notebook, I actually have it written in Polish. So that was quite a challenge, and I'll get to that in a second, how I was preparing for the podcast for you. I translated some of the quotes, so they're probably not exactly the same way translated as one would find them online, but I tried to keep the gist of them the same. And the second reason why I've decided to reread or re-listen to the book was that ultimately, especially with books that are not necessarily entertaining, but more guiding in a way, similarly to The Body Code or works by Jordan Peterson, I do enjoy having a chance to look on a piece of paper or at least on screen for texts that are more sort of guiding principles heavy, because it allows me also to highlight them, maybe make some notes for myself, and then later on it's much easier for me to note down those notes. So obviously, as I've already showed you before, some of my books, some of the books that I've read and shared with you, I've actually made notes of in my iPhone notes, and it's okay, it works. What works, but it's not ideal, right? It's much easier, much more clear, maybe even, to highlight the parts that I really like, and maybe even jot down some ideas straight away inside the book, especially, only if the book is mine. And I do believe it actually, as long as you're not sort of, painting over it, as long as the main message of the book stays the same and you're just noting around or maybe highlighting, I would argue that it actually adds to the book's quality. And of course, you might be one of those that likes to keep your books clean, and that's fair enough. I have quite a few books that are pretty much like new. But many of the books that I've had a challenge to get a grasp of, for example, this one is a big one, the Maps of Meaning by Jordan Peterson. It's such a dense in information and such a complicated book to read to start with, that by taken notes, and by highlighting, I've definitely allowed myself some additional support in going through and grasping the ideas that this book had to offer. And I know also, and this is something that I do for myself, that whenever I've done such a thing with a book, so for example, I would highlight the things that really resonated with me, then the next time I can sort of look into that book, it's much easier for me to go straight into the things that resonated with me before. And I don't mean that I will never again look at the things I did not highlight. Rather, it might be helpful if I'm trying to get the gist of what I thought I've noted down to look through the notes themselves, right? So instead of going through the whole chapter and trying to figure out what was the idea behind it, I usually have a few key words and key sentences highlighted that allow me to quickly review what was that about. And that's the kind of strategy that I take. So with The Art of War by Sun Tzu, which I promised I will sort of re-deliver to you because I didn't realize I've never actually gotten around to do it, I thought I'll take my notes from the past. They were actually taken in 2021, so quite some time now. And I'll also just mix in some of my ideas that have popped up recently and sort of translate this piece into something relevant for you, my dear listener, and for the qualities and values that we are in our growing community trying, I hope, to foster and we care about. So, very brief context, because this part I did not actually take too much note of, and I would like to go deeper into the other areas. The Art of War by Sun Tzu is basically a sort of a set of rules and guidelines for success in leadership and war, or sort of military striving, written around 5000 BC by a Chinese general. And if you remember, we've recently discussed The Prince by Machiavelli. And as we were discussing The Prince, it reminded me of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius and Sun Tzu's The Art of War. And therefore here we are, because I thought, well, that might be quite a nice way of putting these two together. If you particularly got interested about The Prince, and if you are already or you will be reading The Prince, then Sun Tzu's The Art of War is definitely on the list as well. And it could be I can imagine it being quite a nice sort of duel to read together. And obviously, feel free to read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. I hope you already did, because we've done that book a while back. But in terms of The Art of War and The Prince, these books are very similar in many ways. For me at least, they seem similar, especially in the way they are formed. So it's not necessarily a story, and it's not necessarily one something that has been created to become a book. Rather, it's almost as if someone was just taking notes into their, journal, whether it was militaristic journal or not, or political one for that matter, for Machiavelli, and then decided, well, I might as well put it into one big compilation. And which is also, this brings us back to the question of my friend today, who said that he doesn't really read books he doesn't feel attracted by books that are written in such a way. And as much as I can, imagine that is the case for him, I don't find it to be any problem whatsoever. I find this to be quite an easy read, and I'm pretty sure you will find it too. It might just be that it's missing some storytelling, if you will. And so, for that part, I would definitely recommend other books than The Art of War or meditations or the Prince. Anyway, I thought I have quite a lot of notes for myself from this book, and the majority of them are in Polish. So I thought, what could I give you without spoiling all the fun, right? Because the idea here, yet again, as per usual, is I'll give you some ideas, but not all, and I will translate them into something that you will be more likely to relate to, while also allowing you to then go get yourself the book, and or maybe even download it online. I'm pretty sure both The Prince and Sun Tzu's The Art of War you could download online, no problem, in a PDF form, because they are small, they're quite little books, and read for yourself. So I've prepared 3 main points, and as per usual, we will also finish with a classic sort of invitation or a challenge, and this might be actually quite a powerful one. And I think especially, in relation to The Prince that we've discussed recently, this might be a very, very powerful combo for you to take forth. And so I hope that that's exactly what's going to happen for you. So let's see. First point that I've taken from this is actually something that really hit me straight away. I sort of opened the notebook, started looking through it, and it dawned on me how much of this is applicable to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but also other martial arts. And then I started thinking about this more sort of broadly and thought, well, this is relevant to life, so I might as well give it to you, so to speak. So the one of the guiding principles, or one of the ideas that Sun Tzu points out in his work, is to be adaptable and overcome difficulties in a manner that is resemblant of being like water. And so if you can just imagine, water is one of those few substances that take shape of any vessel it's poured into, right? And it has the ability to also really drain away a rock over time. So it is also very resilient, and it's sort of, it can change shapes and can change its states, right? From gas to water to liquid, and from liquid to gas, and into a sort of a solid, icy kind of a rock. And the idea here, most importantly, and as you will, you have to remember, this book is written for the purpose of military success. So some of the words I will be using here might be reminiscent of a sort of a fight like jargon, or some sort of military jargon, but don't worry about it. The ideas here are relevant for not only aggression and not only violence in general. So this idea that we should become like water, and we should be flexible, we should attack where the opponent is weakest. We should, be aware of those points. We should use the element of surprise, and we should first and foremost learn the rules of the game, or learn how the opponent plays the game. And so before I go any further, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a digression here. I am wondering to a great degree how many of you have practiced or are practicing any sort of martial arts. I know that I've talked about martial arts a number of times. We've actually had the interview with my coach, Sai from Low Tide BJJ in Edinburgh. And I think this is really relevant to this particular area. So, even if you are not particularly interested in martial arts altogether, may I sort of share with you just this, that I've observed over time, and don't get me wrong, I'm still barely scratching the surface of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I did do 3-4 years, let's say, of kickboxing before at uni, and then I switched to Jiu-Jitsu part-time / full-time in 2021, then had a year break, and now I'm back. So it's been more or less 2.5 years, I think, that I've been training fairly consistently. And if there is one thing that I've observed, and please feel free to check out the episode with Sai about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's one of the earlier episodes from 2022, I believe. And also, I think a very relevant episode to this would be the episode interview with Aaron, my friend from Jiu-Jitsu, who's also a cybersecurity interested gentleman. But the one thing that really sticks out for me here is this idea of being flexible and learning the opponent's movement. So in contrast, let's put it this way. When I think about striking, when I think about competing or fighting in a stance, for example, as in kickboxing or MMA maybe or whatever, all the striking, which is basically whenever you're punching or kicking the opponent rather than trying to wrestle them on the ground or submit them by, bending their arm or, choking them, the striking part has a lot to do with how you see the opponent move. And this is something that I've discussed with my friend Anthony, who's actually, an up-and-coming Polish kickboxing sensation, that a big part of learning how to defeat an opponent is to feel them out in a way, to figure out what are their ways of them moving to start with. And in Jiu-Jitsu, even though it might not seem similar because you're almost instantly grabbing and pulling and pushing on one another, so there is much less space between you to observe the sort of the footwork, if you will, and the moves. It works in a very similar manner that whenever you go into this, sparring session or competition set, it probably is a good, thing to say, a fair description of it, that whoever figures out how the other one moves and fights quicker and then is able to dominate the areas where the opponent is the weakest and is the most flexible in changing their approach, is more likely to win. And I don't want this to be a gold standard, take it with a pinch of salt. Ultimately, I'm just here sharing my perspective on this. But this is something that I've observed being developed within me and still will be developing over the next year. So don't you worry, you'll be here, or I will be here to share with you into the future how my jiu-jitsu career goes. Although I'm not that big into the whole competition part, I just like it for the benefits that it creates per se. But it seems to me that this is one of the greatest skill, the hardest to learn, but also the most beneficial in general to develop within you. This ability to put yourself outside of yourself and observe what is going on to figure out the best way forward. So there are many times when I find myself being, smashed by someone on the ground. Maybe someone is sitting on my chest. Maybe my arm is being pulled in a direction that is not necessarily the most pleasant to begin with. And in those moments, there is this, sort of stimuli versus response time, this mindfulness exercise in a way this space where I can either go into panic mode in many situations, and if you do, then you're obviously gonna lose, or you can try to prolong the trigger of this panic by trying to put yourself outside and reflect on what can happen. So I vividly see one particular position in which I often end up when I'm sort of curled into a ball, whatever you might call it in more professional terms, on my side in this beetle-like state, crunch in a way, assessing what can be done. Because, for example, the person has their knee on my pushed against my belly or against my ribs, and they're trying to get an underhook. They're trying to get me flattened out onto the floor, because obviously you're much more weak and susceptible to attack if you're flattened out rather than curled into this bowl of energy. And it is in those moments when I particularly think about what can I do, what can be done there. I sometimes observe what's going on around me. I have moments when I'm genuinely thinking about other things as I'm struggling to recompose myself. And why am I talking about this is, it seems to me that by allowing yourself those spaces to first learn how the fight is being fought, or what are the rules of the game to begin with, you can save yourself the precious energy and potentially maybe even the precious victory or defeat by allowing yourself to have those reflections to begin with. And let's just put it in the context of maybe some decisions you have to make in your day at work, or in your day, I don't know, during your holidays, or in your financial health. We rush into many things, and many of us, especially if you're like me, might be very impatient, too impatient to really give yourself time to think. I have that. But I've taught myself again and again, and I'm still on my journey. Don't get me wrong, no one's perfect here. I bet you are not either. I've managed to teach myself, and through some tools which I've shared with you before, some scheduling that I have for the day, or some weekly planner, or, goals for the month, or whatever, both big and sort of small goals, I can get myself that additional time to figure out what is most important, or maybe what are the rules of whatever I'm trying to do. So we've talked about this in relation to passing uni, I remember. At the beginning, just before September kicked in, I remember I've created for you an episode which was about diligent work and so forth, and scheduling, most importantly. And beginning with the end in mind, as the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People book has taught us. I think this is relevant in this regard. So if you have a big decision to make, or if you're trying to figure out what to focus on this today, this month, this week, this year, you gotta give yourself the time to learn what's important, to learn the rules, whether, it means figuring out how the game works. If you want to start trading on stock exchange, probably first learn what does it mean to trade on stock exchange. Don't just jump into something someone told you to invest in blindfolded. That can hurt. And similarly in, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or in life, make sure to give yourself the space to learn the rules, to figure out where the opponent is the weakest. Maybe figure out where is the best way to attack. And this can be translated to anything. What is the best decision you can make this week? What is the best investment you can make this year? What is the best use of your time you can make today to make yourself better? Whatever that means to you. And one additional area here that this point really hit me with, pun intended, is the idea that even in the greatest of chaos, you should know your situation. And this really resonated with me deeply in terms of the book by Jocko Willink. If you might be familiar with Jocko podcast, amazing podcast, and mostly about leadership skills and military and sort of experiences from military translated into everyday business and life. Extreme Ownership is the book by Jocko Willink that I've read quite a while back now. I might make an episode about it. I don't know how useful it might be for some of you, but it's definitely a book that made a big impression on me, especially in this idea that you should be the idea of being the eye of the storm, right? To be composed within, and even if there is chaos breaking loose all around you, you should be the one that knows your situation, and you should be the one that calculates what to do. And in many ways, I think, it seems to me, it does depend on your ability to put yourself outside of yourself, to not allow the emotions to take charge, in a way to be in charge of the emotions. And I think this is very much so in line with our ideas of mindfulness that the podcast is filled with, for that matter. So this idea of extreme ownership, which is very resonant to what Jordan Peterson calls us to do in his works, which is to pick up the cross and bear it, to become responsible, to be the kind of person that can be relied upon. This is also what Sun Tzu invites his generals, his audience that are supposed to listen to his guidance to do. And so I would invite you as well to think about this, and especially think about this in terms of just how much can you be responsible for, because there is a lot of areas in your life where you can either take responsibility for what's happening to you and therefore become more powerful in many ways, or you can abandon the responsibility there, but then you have to face the consequences of this abandonment of responsibility. And some of these consequences, in my opinion, are not worth the bargain. So we've recently discussed it with a group of friends at work. My perspective is, and this is purely mine, that the best way to ensure you will be fine into the future is to take matters in your own hands. And of course, I don't mean, yet again, blindly and stupidly making choices that you don't know anything about. Rather, I would like to know at least what I'm deciding upon and the basis of my assumptions that are guiding this decision making. So if it's about a decision about a job, or if it's about a decision about finance, or if it's a decision about how to travel home for Christmas, I'd rather be in charge of it myself and then delegate when I know what does it mean to do a good job, than not knowing what does it mean for this to be a good job well done, delegate responsibility. Because it is in those moments when we delegate responsibility without knowing what we are actually delegating that people can scam us in many ways, and we can get hurt ultimately because it was ours, not theirs problem to begin with. So the greatest example here is if you would ask someone to invest your money, which is ultimately yours, and it's probably an integral part of your well-being, and you don't know what does it mean to invest well, and so they invest, something happens, and they can tell you it went great while it went the worst of all, and you wouldn't know because you have no basis to assume and conclude any of these performances. So Sun Tzu, in his one of his teachings about adapting and overcoming and learning to be, in the middle of the chaos, knowing your situation and knowing the rules of the game, really invites you to be this extreme owner, this responsible person within that area. And yet again, if you are fighting in martial arts or in life for something, then it might be very beneficial for you to take time and look from the outside. What is important? Where is the weakest link? What can I do about it? So, yeah, these are the ideas from the first part of our discussion. Now, the second point I've taken note of here is something that really fascinated me. So I was going through my notes and I found this note which said 5 important guidelines. And it literally has 5 important guidelines. So I'm going to read them out and then sort of play on them, have a little discussion about it. So the first one is know when you are able to face the challenge. Be patient and ready. Know your winning chances, your possibility to win. Be at peace with yourself and your team. And finally, delegate to inspire and empower. Now, among these 5, there seems to be a theme. And the theme itself is actually, in my opinion, encapsulated in this quote I've taken note of, which is definitely paraphrased. So pardon me, but you can find it online. The quote says, "Know yourself and your enemy, and you won't be defeated." Now, so let's take them apart, shall we? The first one being know when you're able to face the challenge. I think this is a very practical guideline. You should know, and in Polish there is a saying that you should measure your sort of aspirations for your abilities. In other words, you should not bite more than you can chew, right? That's I think that's the English version of this idiom. So the idea here is that you should measure, or you should at least assume, what does it take to face the challenge and what does it take to win. And you should know the chances you have of that success. So, I would say it's quite a reasonable thing and quite a commonsensical thing to consider. It's, you are potentially, if you're starting, let's say that you just finished uni and you're applying for jobs, you're very likely to be accepted for an entry-level position at one of the companies. Maybe it's going to be a graduate scheme, maybe it's going to be like an internship. You're rather unlikely to be accepted as the CEO of the company, unless you set up your own company, obviously, and you become the CEO because, it's a startup. So, but that's a very extreme case, and is definitely not resemblant of how the world works for the majority of people. So you should kind of get a feel and practice getting a feel of what you can and cannot do. And this should not be something that discourages you. Don't mistake, and I think this is what many people, I observe that in many of my friends, so I assume it's relevant for more of you guys, and for myself in many ways. It seems that we are often very critical and very quick to discard ourselves as a potential, winner of a certain situation, or a beneficiary of a certain case. So, this is not to say you should not strive for more and you should not raise your standards. Of course you should. And you should do all you can to make your dreams your reality, right? That is literally, I think, the most truthful and optimistic, realistic in many ways view of the world. Nevertheless, you should know that, and you should observe that there is time for things, right? It might not be possible for you right now to apply for a managerial position in a company if you've just finished uni, but in a few years' time, nothing is stopping you from doing that, and the chances are you will be ready for it. So it is just about picking your battles, which is such a big part of achieving success. And maybe if you are striving for something that is, sort of far into the future, if you put it into a smaller steps, and Sun Tzu actually translates an ideal battleground situation for the reader to analyze what can be done in certain stages of the battle. If you do that, if you walk the steps backwards and you figure out what you can do this week, this month, this year to help that dream of yours in 5 years' time become a reality, then that is very much so something worth doing and is likely to bring you success. It's just everything has its time. And naturally, you cannot be, for example, 18 years old when you're 16 years old. It just doesn't happen like that. You can't just skip 2 years in, unless you've at this point are listening to this and we have time travel. So then, yeah, sorry, bring me to your future, please. I would love to see it. So secondly, be patient and ready. And that really hit me. I've written these notes 3 years ago. So much changed in my life over these 3 years. And I bet in 3 years' time, so much more will change, right? But being patient and being ready. This quote that really resonates with me deeply. It's better to be prepared for an opportunity and not have one than have an opportunity but not be prepared for it. And I really think this is what Sun Tzu's ideas here are, that you should be patient, you should not rush. You should make sure that you are making use of all your possible resources in an efficient manner. But make sure that you are ready when the time comes. Similarly to many other, authors and philosophers in particular, when they urge you not to rush, and or as the Treebeard said in Lord of the Rings, let us not be hasty. Let us not be hasty in the judgment, and let us not be hasty in the ways we attack our opponents and challenges. Now, finally, be at peace with yourself and your team and delegate to inspire and empower. And I think these two in particular, the last one, is something we are missing a lot. So I've worked by now in 15, maybe 16 different places. Some of them were fairly, successful companies. Some of them were just a small shop, corner shops. Some of them were startups. And the one thing that is definitely the factor that greatly affects the success of a business, of a team, is the team's ability to work as one towards a unified goal, to strive for one thing in alignment. And you can see it everywhere, in terms of a relationship, you're much more likely to have a successful and happy relationship, or at least that's what the books would tell you, if you are aligned with your partner, if you both are at least in part striving for the same thing. If, in contrast, one of you is, driving to have a family, while the other wants to be a free spirit and travel the world for the next 20 years, you're unlikely to have a successful and positive relationship. Of course you can, I'm not saying that's impossible, but it is less likely that your team will sustain the damage of challenges and turbulations when the time comes if you are not fully aligned, or at least greatly aligned in terms of your values, your priorities, your way of looking at the world. And this is really a big thing to consider for yourself, for your team, for your business, because if you are not looking towards the same guiding star, or at least in the similar direction, you're likely to be lost and you're likely to be inefficient. And these just sound like ways to slow your progress and to ultimately hit the mark, which leads me to the second part, which is really interesting. Delegate to inspire and empower. There is this phenomenon, I don't remember from what book I've read it from. It's from psychology. There is this phenomenon that actually people love, even if, in certain situations they might not be ready for it or happy to take it, people love and appreciate when you ask them for favors, or when you give them a chance to offer you some help. Because in many ways, first of all, it builds this rapport between both of you, and it allows them a space to show themselves as capable human beings, and especially men are, I know I am, deriving a lot of their self-worth from their ability to help, their ability to be, useful, and to feel worthy. So, you're actually giving someone a chance to empower them by asking them for help, even if it is something that might be trivial enough that you could try and attempt and do it yourself. And secondly, this idea of inspiring as a way of keeping your team, your army, your family, your, community together in favor of going and in favor of really making the mark, is something that I would say is a very relevant for our times and a very powerful one. I say this again and again, it breaks my heart to see the division that we have in the world, or at least the seeming division, because I tell you, I've not met anyone out there, and fair enough, I live in one city, I'm not living in all of them at the same time, but I'm not meeting in life as many people as I can observe on the internet that are presenting the divisive views that the media and the social media seem to be saturated with. And maybe the truth is that the world isn't as divided as the social media and media make it. That's probably a fair assumption. Nevertheless, it seems to me that we need more unity, and we need more love and appreciation and support for one another now more than ever, and maybe even more tomorrow. And I hope that, in many ways you are with your communities doing the good work, the inspirational and the empowering one. So remember, next time you're with your colleagues at work, or next time when you're with your classmates, or with your spouse, or with your kids, with your family, your friends, think whether there is something you could ask them to do for you as a little favor. Give them a chance to feel valued, to feel useful, to feel worthy. And also think about how can you inspire them by offering them a chance to grow. Because delegation, in a good sense, as I understand it, for a manager, for example, a good manager delegates because they give the responsibility to the other person, allowing that other person to fill the boots, so to speak, and to really grow while being under this, supervision of someone more experienced and more likely to be able to pick up whatever was dropped and help that person go and succeed in these tasks. Now, finally, quite a dramatic little quote I've prepared for you here, and I am aware of time, so we'll probably have another 1-hour episode. Sorry, I got carried away, let's say. I just love talking to you. So this idea here is something that really struck me, maybe in a way like a final piece of the puzzle of today and of this of these ideas from Sun Tzu's Art of War. And as I said, I did translate it from Polish, so forgive me. It says, "When there is no way out but to die, your army will be impossible to be defeated." The idea here, and I've taken a few notes here for myself to talk about this. The idea here was broken down in the book into 3 pieces. So the guide and the guidance inside the book said, whenever you're outside of the comfort, of your country or of your province, and obviously this is in terms of the militaristic term, but it can be in terms of anything. Whenever you're outside of your comfort zone, when you're striving for success, when you're trying to win the war within you, or when you're trying to overcome the challenge that you're facing, maybe pass those exams that you're studying for, maybe finish that degree that you're working for, maybe finish the project you've been hustling to complete. There are 3 pieces that hold, 3 pillars that hold you and your team and your army and your community together. And these are taking care of your nutrition, taking care of your rest, and keeping up great spirits. Now, let me first relate to an individual situation. And this is particularly useful, I think, for us because ultimately many ideas that we share together in this podcast are about figuring out a way of getting better with ourselves on our path to success, whatever that means. And this is something very relevant for me, and I'm definitely on the path of figuring out my own new way of doing things. For the context, I've recently started a new job, and it is by far probably one of the most labor-intensive appointment I've been given for a while. Uni was intense. This is more intense than uni. We have a lot of things to study and not much time, and a lot of things also on the side to also take care of while on the job. So you're realistically, you're not only studying at work, but also sort of studying after hours. And therefore, my schedule has completely switched. I used to work remotely, and I used to have a flexi hours, which was a lot more relaxed on the idea of when I do the work. It was about, just doing the task and getting into your own stuff. Now I'm scheduled for certain hours of the day every day in the week, and then obviously the weekends I'm also juggling quite a few things. Here we are, Friday night, and I'm recording a podcast because usually I would record it in a different time, maybe sometime in the daytime over the week, but nowadays I don't have that daytime anymore, right? I'm committed to this job. And there are those 3 things that I really need to take care of, right? I need to take care of my nutrition. I need to keep eating healthy, and I need to also, I would say, on the back end of that, keep moving. So make sure to making sure to go outside every day, even if it is just for a little brisk walk, making sure to have a little workout, go jiu-jitsu, because without it I think I'm gonna go crazy, and take care of my nutrition, right? Similarly, I cannot stay up late all the time because I'm gonna be trained and I'm incapable of studying, so I need to take care of my rest. And then finally, I need to keep up good spirits because I know that it's gonna get hard. The going gets hard. Sometimes it does. It with everything. There are days when with the podcast it's hard. You know, there are days with anything that it can be hard, especially if you're ill or overwhelmed or, you know, just too busy to scratch your backside. So I think this is particularly relevant to all of us. In whatever case you find yourself in, make sure to find time for these activities. And from the 7 Habits of Successful People, a great idea that I've tried to incorporate into my life even more is this idea of 3 things that you need to do each day, right? You need to take care of your body, take care of your mind, and take care of your spirit. And taking care of your body is basically, you know, some sort of a workout or activity, and taking care of nutritious foods, and that's alike. Taking care of your mind is reading, writing, journaling, learning new things. And then taking care of your spirit is meditating, taking a walk in nature, chatting with a friend, being with loved ones, doing things that fill you up. And these should not be negotiable, guys. These should be your priority. I know you need to make that dollar, that's fair enough. I know I do too. But don't abandon those things. Make sure to take care of them. Even, like, think about it. This guy, 5,000, in the year 5,000 before Christ, says, take care of your nutrition, take care of your rest, take care of your great spirits. Really take care of it. Because you are in this for the long run, or so I hope. I know I'm hoping that I am. And to be able to deliver the quality of work, both for my company that I'm working for and for my audience that you are, and to be the best I can be for my love, and to be the best I can be for my friends, and to be the best I can be for myself. There are things I need to do. I need to take care of myself. And in a similar fashion, you need to take care of yourself too. And if you want to broaden it now, take care of your community, of your team. If you're a manager or a leader, take care of the people below you, conceptually. Make sure that you prioritize those things. And now the final and slightly morbid, but also very interesting and very, I would say, inspiring point on this note is this idea of burning the boats. If you want to take the island, burn the boats. I don't remember who said that, but it was also said in the context of the myth or the story of Troy. If you remember when the Achais went to Troy, it's written by Homer in Odyssey and in Iliad. The idea was that when they arrived to Troy, they burned the boats because that way there was no way back. They couldn't go back unless they succeeded. And so they had to win. And Simon Sinek, the author of Start With Why, puts it very eloquently when talking about the Vietnam War, interestingly enough. And the idea there is that Simon Sinek puts across this idea of infinite war versus infinite games versus finite games. So have this in mind. when the US military, after the French sort of failed, when the US military went to Vietnam to occupy it, they were ultimately fighting the finite game, finite war. The idea was there is this country that we're going to occupy, and the moment we will finally get all of the able people to fight with us, either on our side or killed, the country will be ours and the war will end, the game will finish, right? That's the finite end, finite goal. The thing is, the Vietnamese were not looking at it that way. They were looking at it from the infinite war position, infinite game. They were in this for life. There was no way back. They could either fight or they could die. They didn't consider surrender as an option. It's a very similar situation that the Polish resistance during the Second World War did with the Germans and the Russians occupying us. That one group, one side were fighting a finite war, assuming that at some point the local citizens would break and would succumb to the new occupier, while the other side would rather die than allow themselves to be defeated, to be surrendered. And this is ultimately the Simon Sinek's proposition of why, for example, the campaign in Vietnam didn't work, because one side was fighting a finite war while the other was fighting an infinite war. So one of them burned the boats while the other had the opportunity to get out, which they did after all these years of awful atrocious cases. And so the invitation by Sun Tzu for us is that whenever you are going for something, whenever you are striving for a goal, the moment you commit to it, you should burn the boats. So whether it means investing in a course you want to take, because therefore you will have motivation additionally to do it because you know how much you've invested in it. Whether it is giving yourself no way out but approaching that girl or boy on a night out because you've said to a bunch of your friends, okay, I'm going, that's it. If I come back without their number or a no from them, then, maybe you can insert here some sort of miserable punishment that you're going to be liable for. You need to put yourself in a situation where there is no way back. And this might sound a bit drastic, and fair enough. Maybe in many areas of your life you're not ready to do it. You're not willing to do it. Some of us are more risk averse than others, which also makes it more difficult for them. But the way I contextualized it for myself, the way I think about it for myself is, if I'm going for something, if I'm trying to do something, I'll make sure that with myself I can say I've done all I could. And of course, there will be times when I will fail in that as well, miserably so. But the moment you do give yourself that reassurance, the moment you do say, okay, I will do my very best wholeheartedly and see what happens, not only will you see the results improve greatly, but you will also feel, at least that's my experience, much more optimism and lightness in the actions you take. So a good example for me was the applying for jobs. I remember in 2022, at the very beginning of the year, I've lost a few contracts with clients. I lost one particular job, which was sort of paying quite a bit chunk of my bills. I was working freelance, and there came a point when I was really at my, at my end in terms of finance in life, and in many ways I felt very defeated. But I made a point of applying for jobs, and I applied for, 200 jobs, maybe more, absurd amount. And many of them I applied without getting any feedback. Many of them I've gotten the feedback I'm not qualified for and so forth. But I do truly believe, because I knew I've given my very best, I was much more likely to feel motivated to continue doing it. And afterwards, I could reap the benefits of actually getting the feedback. And I think many of us often sort of do things half-heartedly, which it makes sense. It makes sense from the standpoint of, if you've not given it your all and you failed, at least some part of you kind of knows why it happened. So you're giving yourself a way out. You can say, yeah, I just didn't find the time, or yeah, just there was so many things, maybe next time. These are the paths our ego takes to avoid taking extreme ownership, that extreme responsibility. And maybe you should, if something is worth your effort, maybe you should burn those boats. Maybe you should try as if your life depended on it, because it probably does in many ways. And especially in relationship to any things that you're avoiding because they seem too hard to start, or too monotonous, or too difficult to manage, you can start small, that's all right. But the important thing is to start and to not give yourself a way out. If you treat it as a non-negotiable, then it's much easier to make the decision, because when the going gets tough, you can just say to yourself, all right, I will still go to the gym today, even though I'm not feeling like it, because I said I would. And because I don't want to be that guy who says one thing and does another. That works for me. And so I'm hoping maybe burning the boats in some of the areas of your life as you strive for your best self will work for you too. Now, finally, in terms of the invitation, and there have been quite a few throughout the episode, I would like to leave you with this. Consider maybe what one goal or one piece of the puzzle that we've discussed you've been failing to achieve, or you've been failing to start striving for, or you've been sort of avoiding and, kind of looking around for a way not to deal with it. I know I have some of those. Consider one. Just start with one. And taking into account all that we've discussed today, figuring out the rules of the game, learning to assess the situation before you plan, before you act, planning the action, and most importantly, taking that step, going out into that battlefield and being patient for the results, but consistent in your striving and preparation. Figure out one thing that you could do this week, this month, this year. Start small and give yourself a deadline. And really, what helps for me is write it down. So yet again, and I'm gonna be like, how do you call it? Playing this drum or whatever, all my life, I guess. Figure out what that is. Plan it. Make sure to choose the steps that you know you can take and execute and see the results. As Jordan Peterson said it in one of his books, choose one thing and work on it as hard as you can for a year and see what happens. That's something that I'm trying to explore with my new job. And so I wish for you to choose one of those things and try your best. And once you feel ready and you did start, make sure to have some non-negotiables on the table, burn the boats, and take the island. So that's what I wish for you. Other than that, if you'd like to read the book, I'll put the link below for you, as per usual. I hope this was useful and interesting and entertaining, and thank you for your attention. Have a wonderful week. Stay happy, stay healthy, and I'll see you next time.